You've probably seen slides like this, or sat through presentations where you were just so bored and couldn't wait for it to end. I want to teach you how to avoid this fate and teach you how to create better slides, tell better stories, and apply the principles I learned in working at places like McKinsey and Company and Boston Consulting Group over 9 years. The approach I use to help people create better slides and tell better stories is the 3 principles of flow. These 3 principles, vertical flow, horizontal flow, and overall flow, will help you create more interesting, less boring, and more persuasive presentations. Slides that inspire action, get people to change their mind, and help you make progress in the work you're doing in your company, consulting work, or just giving a presentation. Vertical flow is really about the title of the slide matches the content. How can you do that in the most efficient way? Horizontal flow is about how do you tie all those titles together? Consistently throughout a presentation, are you sticking to a story that makes sense? And then overall flow, how do you bring everything together? How do you bring things up to a level of abstraction and present a few key points that make sense, are sequenced in a way that actually effectively argue what you want to argue or convey the points you want to convey? We're going to dive in and I'm going to show you some examples of what I mean by these 3 principles. The first principle is vertical flow, and this is really about the title of a slide should match the content. It's a simple idea, but often people aren't very good at it. And a way to think about it is put yourself in the audience's shoes. Whoever's going to be looking at your slide, the question they ask more than not is, so what? It's your job as the creator to answer that question. Tell them what it means. Tell them what matters. Tell them what they should think. If you're not answering this question, so what? The slide isn't working. The biggest trap that people fall into, instead of doing this, is just labeling. They put company overview, May 2022, right? This isn't communicating anything. You're wasting valuable real estate at the top of a slide that can tell your audience what they should be thinking. We often forget that what's in our brains, the analysis we did, the hours we spent processing information, our audience didn't do that. They don't know what they should be thinking. It's our job to abstract an insight at that higher level, which ends up being the title of a slide, to tell them that information. Take a look at this slide. This is an example of just a bunch of information on a slide. Now take a look at this one. This is essentially the same information, but I've synthesized it down only to what matters and what I'm trying to communicate. Company growth has doubled in 4 years. The content matches the title. It's simple. It sort of just flows into your brain. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. I have a test I use with people when they're trying to create slides called the 10-second test. In 10 seconds, can you really understand the so what of a slide? Let's look at this slide again. And just notice how it doesn't take a lot of work or effort for you to absorb the message. Now let's take a look at this example from Roland Berger. And I like to use real slides that companies have shared or in the public domain. Look at this slide. It's a little rough. You'll notice there's friction. It's painful trying to figure out what this slide is saying. You can put in some mental effort and figure out what you're supposed to think, but I imagine if you showed this to 10 different people, you'd have 10 different takeaways on what they think is the most important thing in this slide. Now let's look at another example from Oliver Wyman. We can take a look at this slide. As you can see, the title is clear. Cases around the country are trending lower, continuing their decline, or beginning to level off. As you'll see, it's describing something that is declining and leveling off. And you also visually see that quickly, right? It flows into your brain. This slide for most people would pass the 10-second test. This is what you want to achieve. This is where you can enlist a friend, even better if they have no context on what you're showing them. Can they understand what you're trying to convey in 10 seconds? If they can't or don't even know where to begin, you still have work to do. The second principle is horizontal flow. This is where you're connecting ideas from slide to slide. The simplest way to think about this is from the slide titles. So in the first part, we learned that the title is the takeaway. It's the so what that the audience should be taking away. Now, when you read these in sequence throughout a document, do they make sense from one slide to the next? Do the ideas connect? Do they build upon each other? Do they add depth? Do they add context? Now, if you take away the actual slides and read them without that context, do they still make sense? You can actually do this in PowerPoint. I like to go to the outline mode and look at the titles of a presentation I've put together. I still, to this day, will often copy paste those into a Word document and read them like I'm reading a story. What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? Putting them in Word or something like that can be helpful too, because it brings you out of the default that is PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a great tool when used well, but its defaults force us into these disconnected ideas. Slide by slide, we piece together things, but we don't map on this overall flow onto a story. And this is where looking at those titles can be super valuable. Let's look at an example of this. I found this presentation talking about Melbourne in Australia as a tourist destination from BCG. And this is from their upfront context section. As you'll see, there's 7 slides here setting this up. It's hard to digest all these slides at once, but let's strip out the titles. Now look at these titles in order. They tell a pretty clear story and they sort of stand on their own. It starts with talking about the context of what you're about to dive into, talks about Melbourne as a cultural center, as a tourist destination, and then it digs into deeper and deeper detail. And finally, it closes with a broadening of the story a little, talking about how it relates to other cities and compares to them. So you might read these and say, okay, maybe there's a little more clarification in this final point. Maybe we're missing something in the middle. And this can be a good way to understand how strong your argument is, what's missing in your presentation. The final principle is overall flow. Overall flow is taking a 10,000-foot view of the overall presentation and saying, do the highest level points connect? So the vertical flow, you get the individual slides tight and clear. Horizontal flow, you tie them together. But what if you have a really long presentation? Maybe you have 3 or 4 different sections, and each of those sections makes a point, right? You might have horizontal flow in each of those sections, but how do you make sure those are sequenced together? Here's where you can use tools like McKinsey and pyramid principle. And although I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in them here, I have other resources in the description and other videos you can check out where you can layer these on, these principles of flow. A simple example, let's say you have a large presentation, you've done a lot of work, and you've synthesized it down to 3 points. You're about to present to the CEO and tell him these 3 things. First, the competitor is kicking our butt. It's stealing our market share. Second, it's doing it through a superior product to ours. And third, we can actually make R&D investments over the next 12 months that will make it highly probable that we'll be able to create a better product and catch up and recapture some of the lost market share. Now, how do you sequence those 3 big ideas, right? You might have 3 separate sections of a presentation, and each section has 10 to 15 slides. Each of those slides have vertical flow, and each of the slides in each section are horizontal flow. But the overall flow of those 3 messages, how do you sequence them, right? And this can be a helpful way if you're working in a team to discuss what is the order. If you have a hostile CEO that is going to be triggered by the fact that the competitor is kicking his butt, you might want to start with the positive news first. In the next 12 months, we can make these R&D investments. If he's already bought in and he said, hey, I know the competitor is kicking our butt, can you just give me a little more context on that? It might be a safer way to start there and then present your idea about the R&D investments, especially if he's not fully on board yet. Often the place to make sense of your idea's overall flow is the executive summary. While I'm working on a presentation, I like to build an executive summary, which is sort of a dumping ground of some of the bigger themes I'm noticing and some of the individual slide titles. In this example from BCG, we see that they have a 2-page executive summary about the country of Sweden. And you see that they have about 4 key points. They've numbered them, right? This is often a way of creating that structure, creating that overall flow. How do we sequence these points? These points, first one has 2 points, the second one has 2 points, and then 3 and 4 have individual points. And this is sort of a map. This is a plan of attack of here's how we're going to present our arguments. Here's how things are going to flow. And the ways you structure these and sequence these, there's an art to this. And taking a step back, looking at things from an overall flow perspective is a way of forcing you to understand your audience better and really clarify what you're trying to think and say. These three principles, when combined, vertical flow, horizontal flow, and overall flow, can help you create compelling and persuasive presentations. I love teaching people these skills and would love to hear what you think. What further questions do you want me to answer? I also teach these skills in my course. If you want to learn more, you can check that out below. I also do work with companies and hold workshops on helping them come together as a team and taking their ideas and presentations to the next level. If you want to see more videos like this, you can click subscribe and it will motivate me and keep me accountable to actually creating more videos and sharing more ideas with you around how to create better presentations, how to do better business thinking, and other things like that I learned in consulting.